The year was 2367, and Earth's sky had long since been overcast by the shadow of alien ships. Beneath this darkened canopy, the bustling metropolis of New York City stood like a defiant monument to humanity's unyielding spirit. Despite the blackened skies and the crackling hum of foreign technology that filled the air, people walked the streets with their heads high, trying to pretend that the world they once knew hadn't been replaced by one of terror and uncertainty. Among the most defiant was Captain Adrian Holt, a man whose very presence radiated authority and resolve. His chiseled features, carved by years of battle, told the story of a leader who had fought and bled for every inch of freedom. But beneath the iron resolve was a mind constantly at war with itself. The Orca-Ari, an alien race that had come to Earth years ago, were superior in every way. Their technology far outstripped humanity's, and their numbers were vast. Yet, despite all of this, Earth's forces had held firm, and Holt was a symbol of that resistance, one of the few who hadn't fallen into despair. He stood at the edge of a rooftop, gazing out at the city below. His eyes tracked the towering ships that drifted silently across the horizon, ships that represented an enemy so formidable it was almost comical that humanity still fought. Yet fight they did, led by people like Holt, who refused to bend, refused to beg for mercy. To him, the idea of surrender was anathema to everything that made them human. His communicator buzzed, breaking the silence. "Captain, they've sent the message again. They're coming for us. They've given us one last chance to kneel," came the voice of Cale, his second in command. Cale was a man who understood the consequences of this war all too well. He knew that humanity's fight against the Orca-Ari wasn't about winning, it was about survival. But even Cale, with his hardened pragmatism, had a limit. And that limit had been reached. "They can take their mercy and shove it," Holt replied, his voice low but full of conviction. "We're not begging, we never will. We can't win this, Holt," Cale said, the tension in his voice palpable. "We're outgunned, outnumbered. We don't even have the means to fight back effectively. The Orcari have made it clear. They'll annihilate us if we don't submit." "And we will never submit," Holt responded, his voice sharp. "The Orcari may have the upper hand in firepower, but they don't have what we have. They don't have our ingenuity, our will to fight. They think they can break us by making us beg, but they have no idea who they're dealing with." Cale paused, his own doubts simmering beneath the surface. And what if they're right? What if it's us who have miscalculated? Holt turned away from the skyline and looked his comrade in the eyes. "Then we die on our feet, but we don't beg for mercy." With a grunt of resignation, Cale didn't respond. He knew that trying to reason with Holt was like trying to stop a storm. Holt's mind was made up, and no amount of logic could change it. But Cale also knew that Holt's resolve wasn't born of stubbornness alone. It was born of something deeper. A deep, unshakable belief in humanity's inherent right to survive. The captain turned and made his way to the bridge of the Eclipse, his flagship. He could feel the eyes of his crew upon him as he strode down the metallic corridors, the weight of the war pressing down on their collective shoulders. The war wasn't just one of guns and missiles. It was a war for the soul of humanity. And Holt would be damned before he let the Orcari take that from them. On the bridge, the atmosphere was tense. The crew, a mix of soldiers, engineers, and scientists, had gathered to discuss the looming assault. Ilara Reed, a brilliant scientist and a close ally of Holt, was at the helm. Her mind was focused on something far more dangerous than just weapons and tactics. She was trying to uncover a way to outthink the Orcari, to find something, anything, that could turn the tide. "Captain," Ilara began, not looking up from her terminal, "I think we've found something, an anomaly in the Orcari supply lines, a weakness we might exploit." Holt's eyes narrowed. "What kind of weakness?" "I can't explain it fully yet, but I believe we've discovered an old artifact, something ancient, possibly of alien origin, that could be the key to a massive disruption in their command network. It might give us the opening we need to strike at their core." Holt's brow furrowed. "Ancient? Are we talking about a weapon or some kind of technology?" "Both," Ilara said, finally turning to face him. It's unclear, but it's big, and I'm certain the Orkari don't know about it, or they've been deliberately avoiding it. How long before we can deploy it? Holt asked, his tone hardening. Ilara glanced at her terminal again, her mind already racing through calculations. It's going to take time to properly analyze and prepare, but if we move fast, we could be ready in a matter of days. If we get lucky, we could hit them hard enough to destabilize their entire operation. Holt paced, his mind turning over the possibilities. There was no denying that the Orkari were the more powerful force, but humanity had always found a way to survive. They had adapted, had learned, had fought tooth and nail for every inch of their world, and now it seemed that they might have found the means to fight back, not through brute force but through the very ingenuity the Orkari underestimated. "Prepare the crew," Holt said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We move out in 24 hours. Whatever this artifact is, it's our best shot at turning the tide. We're going to make them beg for mercy." As Holt made his way back to his quarters, the weight of what he had just ordered settled over him. There was no turning back now. If this plan failed, humanity's future was over. But if it worked, they might just have a fighting chance. The realization hit him. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to show the universe that humanity would never bow down, never surrender. The Orkari had underestimated them, and that, Holt knew, was a mistake they would soon regret. The air was thick with tension. As the Orkari's message crackled over the communications channel, its harsh metallic voice flooding the room, the offer of mercy came again, a demand for humanity's submission. The ultimatum was clear: kneel or face annihilation. Captain Holt stood before the command console on the Eclipse, his back straight as the words echoed in his mind. His crew waited in silence, all eyes on him. Their hope and fear intermingled in that space, a silent plea for leadership in a moment where everything could fall apart. The Eclipse had been drifting just beyond the reach of the Orkari's superior sensors, a move that had bought them time. But it was only a matter of time before their hiding spot was discovered. They had no illusions. The Orkari were coming. The message was a formality, a signal that the end was near unless humanity chose to bow. "We'll never beg," Holt muttered, under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to face his second-in-command, Kyle, whose face was a mixture of hardened resolve and visible exhaustion. "This is the third time in the last 3 days, Holt," Kyle said, his voice tight with frustration. "How many more times do they expect us to refuse before they wipe us out? They have the power to decimate entire planets in an instant. This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's a death sentence." "I know," Holt replied, his voice steady but cold. "But we're not giving them the satisfaction. I don't care how powerful they are. We'll make them regret underestimating humanity." The room fell silent. Holt's declaration hung in the air, his certainty spreading like wildfire. The room fell silent. Holt's declaration hung in the air, his certainty spreading like wildfire. The crew had fought too long, bled too much, and endured too many losses to surrender now. Holt could see it in their eyes. They were ready to stand with him, ready to do whatever it took, even if it meant facing impossible odds. "Captain," Ilara Reed called from her console, "we've got a fleet of ships inbound. I estimate they'll be within range in 2 hours. If we don't act now, we'll be caught in their crossfire before we even have a chance to move." Holt's mind raced. He had known the Orkari were relentless, but they had been able to delay them this far through sheer audacity. It had worked, because the Orkari were so convinced of their own superiority that they never imagined humanity could keep them at bay. They had underestimated the human resolve. Holt wasn't about to let them make that mistake again. "We won't be fighting on their terms," Holt said, his voice clipped, his mind already shifting to tactical planning. "Gather the strike team. We're going in." Kale raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "Inside their flagship," Holt replied, eyes narrowing with purpose. "We're going to take the fight to them. The Orkari think they can crush us, but what they don't know is that we're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to make them regret every moment they ever spent thinking we'd kneel. The plan was simple, bold, reckless, and fueled by the fury of a people who had nothing left to lose. They would infiltrate the Orcari's flagship, a massive towering structure that had been the symbol of their invincibility. Holt's team would board, sabotage key systems, and if possible, take out their leadership. It wasn't just a strike against the Orcari's technology. It was a message. Humanity would not bow. As the eclipse approached the Orcari fleet, Holt and his crew suited up in their combat armor. The weight of their weapons seemed irrelevant in the face of the true weapon they had: human ingenuity. The eclipse had no intention of staying within the range of the Orcari's devastating weaponry. They would outmaneuver, outthink, and attack before the enemy even knew what hit them. "I hope you've got a way to stop them from nuking us from orbit," Cale said to Ilara, his voice tinged with sarcasm, but also a glint of hope. Ilara gave him a sideways glance. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Just make sure we don't get caught in the crossfire." With the strike team loaded into a stealth shuttle, Holt stood at the helm taking one final look at the Earth below. It seemed so small from up here, just a blue dot among the stars. But it was their home, their fight. And no one, not the Orcari, not any of the aliens that might follow, would take it from them. "All systems go," Ilara confirmed as the shuttle powered up, her fingers flying over the console. "Initiating stealth mode now." The shuttle slipped into the shadows of the Orcari fleet, moving swiftly, quietly, like a phantom on a mission to awaken the gods of war. As they neared the Orcari flagship, Holt felt the familiar rush of adrenaline in his veins. His hands were steady, his mind clear. This was what he lived for, the moment when everything could collapse, and yet the only thing you could rely on was your own will, and the will of those around you. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. A ripple in the fabric of space, a distortion in the calm, as if the very universe itself was holding its breath. Holt's heart skipped a beat. "Wait," he said, his voice tense. "Something's not right." Ilara's fingers froze on the console as her eyes widened. "Oh no, they knew we were coming." Before anyone could react, a massive explosion rocked the shuttle, sending it tumbling through space. The world outside the viewports twisted into a kaleidoscope of blinding light and darkness. The Orcari had anticipated their move, and now the fight was on in full force. Holt's body slammed against the side of the shuttle, but he was already scrambling back to his feet. "Brace for impact!" The shuttle lurched again as they were, hit by another barrage, this time directly from the flagship. Holt's heart pounded in his chest. The Orcari weren't just defending themselves, they were fighting to destroy everything humanity had left. But Holt wasn't about to let them. He gritted his teeth, feeling the fire in his chest, and shouted to his team, "We make them beg now, let's show them who we are." The shuttle crashed into the side of the Orcari flagship, exploding into a fiery mass of twisted metal. The shockwave from the impact rattled the very bones of Holt's crew, but in the chaos, a single thought burned in Holt's mind. The Orcari had crossed the line. Humanity wasn't just going to survive this. This time, they were going to make sure the invaders would never forget what it meant to challenge the human spirit. As the shuttle door blew open, revealing the cold, metallic interior of the Orcari ship, Holt led his team out into the heart of the beast, guns raised, hearts pumping with the fire of 1,000 battles yet to be won. The metallic hum of the Orcari flagship's corridors echoed through Holt's mind as he led his team down. The labyrinthine passages, the walls smooth and unyielding, seemed to pulse with an eerie alien energy. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had developed, and as Holt moved deeper into the ship, he couldn't help but feel the weight of their superiority, pressing down on him. But there was no room for doubt now. They were inside. This was it. There was no turning back. The team moved with precision, their footsteps silent against the cold floors. Their mission was clear. Breach the command center, plant the virus Ilara had designed to disrupt the Orcari's control systems, and if possible, take out their leadership. Holt knew that even if they succeeded, the consequences would be devastating. The Orcari would retaliate in ways humanity could not yet imagine. But that was the price of war, of defiance. If they survived this, it would be a victory for all, of Earth, a victory they couldn't afford to lose. Elara moved ahead, her sharp eyes scanning the unfamiliar alien technology that lined the hallways. She was the key to this operation. Her virus was humanity's only chance at infiltrating the Orcari's defenses. She had spent countless hours reverse engineering their systems, but there was no guarantee it would work. The Orcari were ancient, their technology incomprehensible at times. It was a gamble, but it was the only one they had. "We're getting close," Elara whispered, her voice betraying a hint of unease. "The central control node should be just ahead, but we'll have to bypass at least 3 layers of security before we can upload the virus." Holt nodded, his eyes flicking to the rest of the team. Kyle, his ever-loyal second-in-command, gave him a quick, silent nod of reassurance. Their bond, forged through years of combat, was unspoken but understood. If anyone could pull this off, it was Holt and his team. "Stay sharp," Holt said, his voice low. "We don't know how much longer we have before they realize we're here. We breach fast, disable their systems, and then get the hell out." As they reached a large reinforced door, Holt paused. The door itself was unlike anything they had encountered before, an alien material that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the corridor. Elara stepped forward, pulling a small device from her belt. She attached it to the door, her fingers dancing over the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've never seen this kind of locking mechanism before," she muttered, her voice strained. "It's going to take me a minute." Holt's heart rate spiked. Time was running out. Every second they spent in this hallway was one more second the Orcari had to discover their presence. He shot a glance at Kale, who was scanning the corridor, alert for any sign of danger. The tension was palpable, thickening the air with every passing moment. A soft beep cut through the silence. Elara's face lit up. "Got it," she said, her voice laced with relief. The door slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss, revealing a vast chamber beyond, an alien comma in center, filled with strange consoles and floating holographic screens. But there was no time to admire the alien technology. The mission was simple: disable, disrupt, destroy. "Go," Holt commanded. The team rushed inside, moving quickly, efficiently. They were outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise. As Holt moved toward the central control console, Elara worked swiftly, plugging her device into the nearest terminal. The virus would begin its work the moment it made contact with the Orcari system. Holt had seen her at work before. She was a genius, but even her brilliance couldn't guarantee success. A low, guttural growl filled the room, followed by a series of hissing mechanical sounds. Holt's instincts kicked in as his eyes darted to the far corner of the room. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, clad in sleek, armored suits, their eyes glowing with the same cold, unfeeling light that had become the hallmark of the Orcari, the elite soldiers. "We've been compromised," Kale shouted, his voice a mix of disbelief and urgency. "It's a trap." The realization hit Holt like a punch to the gut. The Orcari had known they were coming. But how? They'd been so careful, so precise. How could the enemy have predicted this? Holt had assumed they were one step ahead, but now it was clear. The Orcari had always been watching. "Take them down," Holt barked, his voice cold and commanding. "Elara, finish the upload." The battle erupted in a heartbeat. Blaster fire lit up the chamber, the sharp, electrified hum of the weapons filling the air. Holt's rifle kicked into his hands, and he fired off a shot at the nearest enemy soldier, the beam slicing through the air with deadly precision. The Orcari soldiers were fast, too fast. Their movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as they countered every move Holt and his team made. But Holt had one advantage. He knew how to fight for his life, and right now that was all that mattered. Kale moved with a fluid grace, his weapon spitting bursts of fire as he cleared a path for the team. Elara, focused and determined, was at the terminal, her hands working with the rapid speed of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. But as Holt glanced at her, He saw the flicker of concern in her eyes. Something was wrong. "I can't. Get through," Ilara yelled, frustration building in her voice. "Their security protocols are too advanced. They've locked me out. The virus isn't going to work." "Damn it," Holt cursed under his breath. They had no choice now. If they couldn't disable the Orkari systems, they'd never escape. But just as hope seemed to slip away, a new voice broke into the chaos, one that wasn't human. The sound of an Orkari officer, their voice deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "Captain Holt, you are more resourceful than I gave you credit for. But you are out of time. You should have taken our offer of mercy when you had the chance." The holographic figure of the officer appeared before them, towering and imposing. It was one of the Orkari commanders, its alien face a mask of calculated disdain. "You will pay the price for your defiance," the officer intoned. "You are no longer fighting for survival. You are fighting for your extinction." Holt's mind raced. The situation had gone from bad to worse, and he had no idea how they were going to get out of this. But one thing was certain. The Orkari had underestimated humanity once again, and Holt wasn't about to let them make that mistake twice. "We don't beg for mercy," Holt growled, his eyes burning with defiance. "We make you beg instead." With that, he slammed his fist against the console beside him, triggering a hidden override that sent a shockwave through the Orkari system. The virus wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal, a beacon that would broadcast humanity's refusal to bend no matter the cost. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the room exploded into chaos. The Orkari officer's voice cut out, replaced by the shrill whine of alarms blaring across the flagship. The Orkari soldiers began to falter, their movements growing erratic as the virus began to take hold. Holt could see the desperation on their faces. They were losing control. "Now's our chance," Kale shouted. But Holt's victory was bittersweet. The Orkari had been caught off guard, but the price was steep. Their attack had put them in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, and they were surrounded. The only way out was through the chaos they had just unleashed. As Holt's team fought their way through the flagship, a thought burned through his mind. This battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity would never beg, not for mercy, not for forgiveness, and certainly not for their lives. The Orkari had made their mistake. Now, humanity would make them regret it. The metallic walls of the Orkari flagship shuddered as explosions rang out. The ship's failing systems groaning under the strain of Holt's virus, the World Sea, seemed to tilt and warp around them as the Orkari soldiers scrambled to regain control, their cold, calculating movements slipping into panic. Holt could feel it now. The momentum was shifting. The tide of the battle had turned, but the outcome was far from certain. "Keep pushing," Holt shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. His pulse was a steady drumbeat in his chest, each step they took bringing them closer to the heart of the flagship. Every hallway, every turn was more dangerous than the last. The Orkari had retaliated with brutal precision, locking down sections of the ship and deploying squads of elite soldiers to hunt them down. But Holt and his team had something the Orkari didn't: determination. They were fighting not just for survival, but for a principle: the belief that no one, not even an ancient godlike species, had the right to demand submission. Holt had always known that the Orkari were ruthless, but now, as the pressure mounted, he saw them for what they truly were: bullies, too reliant on their power to see the one thing they couldn't defeat: human spirit. Kyle was moving with lethal efficiency, gunning down the elite soldiers who attempted to block their path. His face was a mask of fury, but there was something else in his eyes too. Something more primal, something born of years of fighting for a cause that often seemed lost. The soldier who once would have hesitated to kill in cold blood now did, so without hesitation. And Holt? He was a man driven by one singular purpose. He wasn't going to let anyone, not even the Orkari, take that from him. As they neared the command center, a violent tremor shook the flagship. The lights flickered, the walls around them groaning with the force of the ship's internal battle. The virus was working, but so was the Orkari's desperation. They had activated their emergency protocols, initiating a lockdown that would seal the command center off entirely. Holt had no illusions; they would never get another chance. "We need to move now," Alara yelled, her voice sharp with urgency. Her hands flew over the console as she worked furiously to bypass the final security layers. Sweat trickled down her brow, but her determination didn't falter. If anyone could finish what they'd started, it was her. "I'm trying," she snapped back. "This is their last line of defense. If I can't break through, we're dead." Another explosion, this one closer than the last, rocked the floor beneath their feet. Holt's grip on his rifle tightened. Time was running out. "I'll handle it," Cal said, his voice grim as he moved forward, pushing past Holt to take point. "You finish the virus, Alara. We'll buy you the time you need." Before Holt could protest, Cal was already gone, disappearing around the corner with a flash of movement. Holt cursed under his breath but didn't stop him. Cal had always been the one to take risks, to make the impossible happen. This was no different. As Cal's footsteps faded into the distance, Holt turned his focus back to Alara, who was locked in a race against time. Her fingers danced over the terminal, each keystroke a tiny battle against the Orca Ari's sophisticated systems. The hum of the ship's alarm systems was deafening now, each siren a reminder of how close they were to either victory or complete obliteration. "I'm in," Alara shouted, her voice ringing with triumph. The console flashed a bright green, and for a moment Holt thought they might actually make it. But then, with a screech of distorted frequencies, the Orcari officer's voice returned, cold and mocking. "You really believed you could defeat us?" The officer's holographic form reappeared, towering over them, its alien visage an impenetrable mask of superiority. "You, who have spent centuries scraping and clawing your way across the stars, think you can challenge the might of a species that has existed for millennia? Your hubris is your undoing, human." Holt's heart clenched. The Orcari officer's words were like venom meant to break him, to undermine the fight he'd led. But they weren't going to stop him. Not now. "I don't need to defeat you," Holt said, his voice steady, betraying none of the fear that gripped him deep down. "You've already lost. Humanity doesn't beg for mercy. We make you beg instead." Before the officer could respond, Holt slammed a detonator into his palm, sending a pulse through the ship's systems. The virus that Alara had so painstakingly crafted was no longer just a disruptor. It was now a weapon that would cripple the Orcari fleet. Holt had pushed the virus to its limit, causing it to activate a chain reaction that would not only destroy the flagship, but send a signal across their entire network. The Orca Ari officer's face contorted in shock. "What have you done?" The flagship seemed to shudder as if it too were trying to breathe. Sparks flew from the walls and the floors trembled beneath their feet. The virus had spread faster than Holt had expected, attacking not just the systems, but the very heart of the ship. It was as if the ship itself were dying, its systems unable to cope with the human ingenuity that had been injected into its veins. "Get to the exit," Holt shouted to his team. They turned and bolted, the noise of the ship's final death rattle echoing in their ears as they ran. They could hear the shouts of Orca Ari soldiers, the desperate commands to regain control, but there was no time. Every step they took felt like they were running against the clock. The heart of the ship, the lifeblood of the Orca Ari war machine, was crumbling around them. The doors ahead of them opened, revealing a short corridor that led to the docking bay. The shuttle they had used to infiltrate the ship was just a few hundred meters away. But it wasn't safe yet. They had to fight their way through the last line of defense. Orcari soldiers, now desperate, filled the corridor, guns raised. "We're not getting out of here without a fight," Cale growled, moving forward with a blinding speed, his rifle blazing. His face was bloodied, but there was no sign of retreat in his eyes. Holt raised his rifle, taking aim at the nearest soldier, and fired. The blast rang out, and the soldier crumpled to the ground. The team fought as though they were possessed, each shot a promise that humanity would not be wiped out. Holt pushed forward, willing himself not to think about the lives they had already lost, about the cost of what they were doing. This was a battle for survival, one that had already cost them so much, and if they didn't make it out, if they didn't survive this, At least they would have died, proving that humanity would never kneel. They were almost there. Alara was the first to reach the shuttle, and the others followed one by one. The engines roared to life as Holt and his team piled in. But as the shuttle lifted off, the unmistakable roar of the Orkari flagship's collapse shook the shuttle's frame. The massive ship was tearing apart, its once pristine hull now a fragmented ruin as it plummeted into the nearby moon's atmosphere. Holt looked back at the remains of the ship, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. The Orkari had failed to crush humanity. They had failed to make them beg, and now they would face the consequences. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never forget it. The shuttle veered violently as it broke free from the gravitational pull of the Orkari flagship, escaping the wreckage and debris that cascaded through space like a storm of shattered metal and flame. The distant fading image of the Orkari ship, disintegrating into nothingness, loomed behind them. Once an invincible force, now nothing more than a twisted graveyard. Holt couldn't look away. It wasn't just victory they'd achieved, it was a statement. Humanity had taken on the mightiest power in the galaxy, and had won. The cockpit was eerily quiet as they navigated away from the destruction, only the hum of the engines and the occasional beeping of the instruments breaking the silence. The reality of what they had just done was beginning to settle in. They had all expected a costly fight, but this was more than anyone could have predicted. Holt, his body worn and bloodied, sank back into his seat, staring at the endless stretch of space before them. It felt as if the universe itself were holding its breath. "I can't believe we made it out," Alara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was shaky, but there was no mistaking the relief in it. She wiped sweat from her brow and turned to Holt. "The virus. It worked. We actually did it." Holt nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the empty expanse ahead. "It worked. But the fight's far from over." Kyle, who had remained stoically silent up until now, finally spoke. "You think they'll retaliate?" "It's not a question of if anymore," Holt said, his tone serious. "The Orkari have already started a war, but they've also made a mistake. We've proven they can bleed, and the galaxy will take notice." "The Orkari aren't the only ones watching," Alara added. "We've sparked something bigger than us, bigger than humanity." Kale said grimly. "And if we're not careful, it'll consume us." Holt didn't respond right away. His thoughts were clouded with the weight of their actions. The destruction of the Orkari flagship was a major victory, no question, but the cost was still steep. Many had died in the assault on the ship, and even more lives would be lost in the coming war. He wasn't naive enough to think that this was the end. If anything, it was just the beginning. The communication console flickered on suddenly, jolting them all from their thoughts. It was an encrypted signal from Earth Command. "This is Admiral Reyes." The voice crackled over the comms. "Holt, are you there?" "We're here, Admiral," Holt replied, the sound of his voice hoarse, exhausted, but resolute. "The mission was successful. The flagship's been destroyed, but the Orkari know we're here. We've just, started a war." "I know," Reyes said. There was a moment of silence, as if the Admiral were weighing his words carefully. "But your actions have set the stage for something bigger than any of us. Humanity's future in this galaxy will never be the same." "That's the problem," Holt muttered. "We've thrown the first punch. We've forced our way into a fight we don't fully understand. We don't know how the rest of the galaxy will react." "We don't have the luxury of time," Reyes countered. "The Orkari are wounded, but we need to be ready for what comes next. You've ignited something that can either unite the galaxy under humanity's banner or lead to our destruction. We need you back. Now." Holt looked to his team. They all understood what was at stake. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about leading, about surviving, and about holding their ground in a galaxy that might never accept humanity as anything more than an invader. "We're on our way," Holt said, his voice firm. "But be prepared. The Orkari will come for us. They won't forget this." As the shuttle accelerated toward Earth, Holt turned to his team. "Alara, who had been the one to carry them through the digital war, sat in quiet contemplation, her eyes focused on the stars outside. Kale, ever the soldier, was already running through strategies in his mind, formulating the next steps for their fractured military. And Holt, though the weight of their victory hung heavy on his shoulders, found his resolve hardening. It wasn't just about winning this one battle. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity could not, and would not, be cowed by any force, no matter how powerful. As Earth came into view on the horizon, the planet looking more fragile than ever from the cold expanse of space, Holt found himself at a crossroads. The fight with the Orcari was only the beginning. The galaxy was about to change in ways none of them could fully comprehend. Alliances would form, enemies would rise. But humanity, against all odds, had just made its mark, and no one was going to forget the name of those who dared to challenge the stars. The shuttle's descent was smooth but heavy, with the unspoken weight of what they'd just endured. Earth was ahead, its vast oceans and sprawling continents bathed in the light of a distant sun. It looked peaceful from here, untouched. But Holt knew better. The calm that surrounded the planet now was fragile, a temporary respite before the storm. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy, and now they would have to live with the consequences. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the shuttle vibrated softly under the pull of gravity. Holt allowed himself a moment to reflect, watching the view through the cockpit window. The Earth he was returning to wasn't the same one he had left behind. No matter how the next chapter unfolded, things had changed forever. He could feel it in his bones. The world would never be the same again. The Orcari had been humbled, but they weren't the only ancient, powerful force in the universe. Earth command's waiting for us, Kyle said, his voice tinged with both exhaustion and anticipation. They'll have orders, and probably a lot of questions. We'll answer them when we're on the ground, Holt replied, his voice more resolute than ever. The questions will be the same. What's next? As the shuttle's wheels touched down, the landing pad was quiet, eerily so. A small reception party of military personnel stood at attention, waiting for their arrival. Holt's eyes scanned the faces of the people waiting, but none of them could hide their curiosity, their concern. They had all heard the whispers, the rumors of the mission's success, of the Orcari flagship's destruction. The world and the galaxy was holding its breath. When the shuttle's hatch opened, Holt and his team were the first to step out. Ilara was tired, but there was a quiet fire in her eyes. She knew what they had just set into motion. Kyle followed, his usual stoic mask not hiding the shift in his posture, the subtle change that said the war was no longer a distant concept, but a looming reality. Commander Holt, a voice called out from the group of military officials. Admiral Reyes, stern as ever, stepped forward, his face unreadable, but his eyes focused. Welcome back. It seems we've entered a new era. Holt gave a half smile, but didn't say anything for a moment. The weight of Reyes's words sank in. They weren't just back from a mission anymore. They were heralds of something much larger, something far more dangerous. What's the situation? Holt asked, stepping toward Reyes, his team close behind him. Reyes nodded grimly. The Orcari flagship's destruction was felt across the galaxy. We've received reports of alien factions, some neutral, some hostile, starting to make moves. Some are looking for alliances. Others, well, they're looking for retribution. The Orcari won't stop, Kale interjected. This isn't just a fight with one empire. It's the beginning of a much larger conflict. Holt met his gaze. We knew that going in. The question now is what we do about it. Humanity has shown its teeth, Reyes said. Now we need to figure out whether we want to keep showing them, or if we want to try and change the game before we're consumed by it. The next few months will determine whether we rise or fall. Holt nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of Reyes's words. The stakes had never been higher. They had won a monumental victory, but the cost of that victory would be felt for generations. The Orcari had fallen back, but others would rise. Humanity had just carved out a place for itself in the galaxy, but it would need to keep proving its worth. "What's our first move?" Holt asked, his voice steady. "We rebuild," Reyes answered simply. "We strengthen our position. We prepare for the worst." "And what's the worst?" Holt asked, knowing the answer already. Reyes's gaze hardened, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them all. "The worst is a galaxy-wide war. It's one we may have started, but it's one we'll have to finish." The room fell silent for a moment, as each person processed the enormity of what lay ahead. Then, without another word, Holt turned and walked toward the command center, his team following closely behind. He didn't look back at the shuttle or the military personnel standing behind him watching him. Humanity had forced its way to the table, but now the real test would begin. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in a galaxy that had, until now, barely noticed them. As the doors to the command center closed behind them, Holt felt the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders, but he also felt something else. A determination, a fire that burned in his chest, refusing to let go. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. As Holt and his team settled into the strategy room, a soft beep from one of the terminals drew everyone's attention. It was a message encrypted from an unknown source. Ilara, who had been working on a communications array, tapped a few commands, decrypting the message with practiced ease. The screen flickered to life, revealing a symbol. It was unlike anything they had seen before. An emblem they didn't recognize, a jagged geometric shape, almost alien in its design. Below it, a single line of text scrolled. "We are watching. Humanity is not alone. The war has only begun." The room went deathly silent. Holt felt a chill creep down his spine. The galaxy was already a dangerous place, but this felt different. This wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. "Who the hell are they?" Kale asked, his voice low. Holt could only stare at the symbol, his mind racing. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." The galaxy had just revealed a small fraction of its vast, dark expanse, and humanity was already at the center of it all.